Good evening, jolly tea drinkers. Welcome to Bedtime Tea, one more steep before sleep. Grab your tea and your cozy blanket, get comfortable, and allow me to read you a story. Are you ready? Tonight's story is The Case of the Rainy High School Reunion. Chapter 1. It was a gloomy, rainy day in Wellington. Sean Hansen, also known as Mr. Coffee to his friends, entered the tea cafe 10 minutes ago and was still trying to get dry. He sat at the counter and chatted with Paulina. "You know you are so wrong for that," joked Paulina. "How was I supposed to know that it wouldn't work?" replied Mr. Coffee. "You're supposed to use your high-level contacts," said Paulina. "Well, my high-level contacts, as you call them, are reserved for more important situations." He chuckled as he stood up and removed his coat. "Oh, be careful behind you," said Paulina. But it was too late. Mr. Coffee accidentally collided with a beautiful, well-dressed woman who had just entered the cafe. Her bag fell from her hands, tumbled to the ground, and spilled the entire contents of her purse onto the floor. "Will you watch where you're going?" she yelled. "Now look at what you did. This purse cost a fortune," she said angrily as she bent down to pick up her items. "Oh, I'm so sorry," said Mr. Coffee. He immediately bent down on the ground to help her retrieve her items. "Ugh, this day just keeps getting worse and worse," said the woman. Mr. Coffee picked up a card that was on the floor and stared at it for a moment. "Is this yours?" he asked as he held it out to her. "No, I always walk around with other people's identification," she replied sarcastically as she snatched the card from his hands. "Give me that." "I'm sorry, ma'am. I was only trying to help," said Mr. Coffee as he raised his hands innocently. "Don't call me ma'am. It's your fault that I'm down here picking up my expensive things from this cold, wet, filthy floor in the first place," said the woman angrily. "So I don't want or need your help. Thank you." "Okay," said Mr. Coffee. He stood up and went back to Paulina at the counter. "Wow, someone is sure having a bad day," said Paulina. "Hey, we all have those," said Mr. Coffee, deep in thought. He paused for a moment, rubbed his head, and said, "I just need to check something or else I'll hate myself." "Huh?" asked Paulina. "All right, cover me. I'm going back in," Mr. Coffee joked as he straightened his jacket and walked back over to the woman. "Hey, Robin is always here if you need backup," joked Paulina. "Excuse me again," said Mr. Coffee as he walked up to the woman, who was now standing and fixing items in her purse. "What now?" said the woman, full of irritation, still looking through her purse. "Pardon the interruption, but I saw on your ID that your name is Evelyn Gilmore?" asked Mr. Coffee with hesitation. "Yes, what is it that you want?" the woman curtly asked. "Well, my name is Sean Hansen, and I went to school with an Evelyn Gilmore, briefly, and I was just wondering—" She suddenly stopped what she was doing and slowly looked up into Mr. Coffee's face. She studied him for a moment and then burst out in joy, saying, "Oh my gosh, Sean! Is it really you?" "Evelyn?" asked Mr. Coffee. "You really remember me?" She jumped, gave him a big hug, and said, "Of course I remember you." "This is so funny," said Mr. Coffee, I was just telling my friends a story about you the other day. Get out! You were talking about me, Sean? As she playfully swatted him on his chest. All good things, I hope? She asked softly. Yes, chuckled Sean. You were one of my only friends in high school. They smiled at each other. Then Mr. Coffee said, Come, let me introduce you to my friends. They walked over to the counter. Paulina, you'll never believe this. Meet Evelyn Gilmore, my old friend from high school. Evelyn Gilmore? Asked Paulina. Yes. Remember I just told you about her a few weeks ago? Said Mr. Coffee. Evelyn Gilmore, Paulina repeated as she slowly remembered. Right, can you believe it? Said Mr. Coffee. He looked at Evelyn with surprise. I always wondered whatever happened to you. Seriously? I always wondered what happened to you, said Evelyn. I always regretted that we didn't get closer back in high school. She placed her hand on his arm. Oh, Evelyn Gilmore, said Paulina. Yes, said Sean. He gave Paulina an annoyed face. Why does she keep saying my name? Asked Evelyn. I'm pretty sure that she's just slowly remembering my story and processing the fact that she's actually meeting you in person, said Mr. Coffee. Oh, well, I suppose it's nice to be able to meet one of Sean's friends, said Evelyn. She then turned to him and said, Sean, I've missed you so much. Come, let's sit down and catch up, she said as she led him to a table. Oh, my coat is so wet. Oh, let me help you with that, said Mr. Coffee as he helped her to remove her coat. Thank you, said Evelyn. I see that your gentlemanly ways haven't changed in all these years. Mr. Coffee chuckled as he hung both of their coats on the coat rack. Oh, I just try to help my friends whenever possible. Speaking of friends, you should also meet Miss T, said Paulina. Oh, yes, of course. Can you please grab her from the kitchen? Asked Mr. Coffee as he sat down. Evelyn, would you like something to drink? They have wonderful tea here. Are you thirsty? He asked her. Evelyn placed her hand on top of his and said, Why, yes, I am. Thank you for asking. Oh, Miss T, bellowed Paulina. Miss T exited the kitchen, looking disheveled. She was covered with flour. Her hair was partially wet and frizzy, and her normally white apron was now covered in stains. Paulina was not pleased. Is everything all right? Asked Miss T with concern. What happened to you? Whispered Paulina aghast as she walked over to her friend. What? Miss T looked down at herself and chuckled. Oh, funny story. You see, I brought some trash outside, got caught in the rain, then the trash bag broke. Then, when I was finally back inside and started preparing the cookies and scones, I slipped on the floor while holding an open canister of flour in my hands, effectively spilling the flour all over myself. And these cinnamon stains right here, she said as she pointed to her apron, are from when I attempted to stop myself from falling and knocked over a bowl of cinnamon that was on the counter. Ooh, all in all, a great rainy day, wouldn't you say? She joked wearily. I'm so glad that you're amused, said Paulina as she attempted to wipe off some of the flour and smooth down Miss T's hair. But right now, I need you to meet Mr. Coffee's old high school friend, Paulina said in a low voice. Old friend? Questioned Miss T. He said he only had 2 friends in high school. Ronnie? No, guess again, said Paulina as she led them over to the table. Mr. Coffee stood to make the introductions. Evelyn, I'd like you to meet Alina Messina. Alina, please meet my dear old friend, Evelyn. Evelyn Gilmore, whispered Paulina loudly. Evelyn Gilmore? Asked Miss T. Yes, the same one from the story I was just sharing with you the other day. I'm just as shocked as you are. I mean, Evelyn, after all these years, said Sean as he smiled at Evelyn. Well, it's lovely to meet you, Evelyn, said Miss T. Please excuse my appearance. I had quite the excitement in the kitchen earlier. She chuckled. Oh, don't you worry about that, dear, said Evelyn. Workers normally stay in the kitchen anyway, so it's totally fine. No, Alina isn't a worker, Sean corrected. She owns this tea cafe. We call her Miss T, he said with a smile. Oh, you own this little establishment, said Evelyn, as she briefly looked around and then back at Miss T. How quaint. Thank you, said Miss T. You know, we work really hard to provide. So, Jean, sit down and let's talk, interrupted Evelyn, as she pulled his hand to sit down next to her. I want to hear everything that you've been up to all these years. She leaned closer to him and allowed her fingers to dangle on his arm. Rude, said Paulina with a low voice. Oh, you know, the usual, said Mr. Coffee as he looked at Paulina and Miss T. School, business, nothing to brag about. Yeah, Mr. Coffee lives quite a boring life, said Paulina. Mr. Coffee gave her a look and she chuckled. Mr. Coffee? Asked Evelyn. That's what we call him, said Paulina. He claims to love coffee, but if you ask me, I'd say he really likes his tea. So much so that he spends most of his days right here in this quaint cafe with us. Really? Replied Evelyn with disdain. You spend most of your days here? But why? Yes, here. What's wrong with that? Asked Paulina, offended. Miss T patted her arm to calm down. You know, I can't believe you thought I would ever forget about you, Sean, said Evelyn, ignoring Paulina and quickly changing the subject. I've thought about you so many times throughout the years. You did? Asked Sean. Yes. How could I not? Replied Evelyn softly. Paulina interrupted the moment and said, You know, Mr. Coffee told us the story of when that guy almost got him sent to prison. What was his name again? She asked. Mark, said Sean, as he looked away, deep in thought. Mark Henderson, said Evelyn with total disgust. Yes, I don't think I will ever forget that name. I do wonder whatever happened to that guy. Oh, would you like to know the tea, as the young people say? Chuckled Evelyn, because I have all of it, starting with when he married a sweet young woman and then sucked the very life right out of her. I'm not sure that I want to gossip about these people with you guys, said Miss T with uncertainty. Oh, sweetie, it's not gossip when it's the truth, said Evelyn with a smirk. So pull up a chair if you want to hear it. Paulina quickly pulled a chair up to the table. Paulina, whispered Miss T. What? We have no customers at the moment. Plus, I kind of want to hear it, said Paulina. Oh, wait, let me grab my cup of tea. Would anybody else like one? She said as she rushed back to the counter. Miss T chuckled and shook her head. Why don't you sit down and I'll grab tea for the table, said Miss T as she went to the counter. Evelyn, I'm surprised, said Mr. Coffee. You never liked to gossip back in high school. Well, a lot has happened since high school, Sean, replied Evelyn earnestly. Okay, I'm ready, said Paulina as she sat back down at the table. Tell us whatever became of old Mark What's-his-name. Well, he married this sweet young woman straight out of college, said Evelyn. Then he cheated on her left, right, and sideways, and basically drained every ounce of joy and sweetness from her throughout their marriage. Poor girl was a wreck. Oh, that sounds awful, said Miss T sympathetically, as she rested teacups on the table and then filled them with tea from a kettle. Poor thing, said Paulina. Sounds like he became worse than he was in high school, remarked Mr. Coffee as he took a sip of tea. So awful, and I bet they always keep up appearances too, said Paulina, so nobody knows that she is secretly suffering inside. Are you friends? Do you check in on her? Asked Sean, very concerned. Only every day for the last 10 years. The good news is that the divorce was finalized last month, said Evelyn. But I did keep the ring so that I could pawn it, she said with a devious smile. I don't need the money. I just want to see the look on his face when I tell him that I did it. Paulina spit out her tea and said, Wait, what? I also had my name legally changed back to my maiden name, Gilmore, so that I could completely rid myself of his legacy, said Evelyn, as she looked up and out into the distance. Wait, Evelyn, let me get this straight, said Sean as he jumped up out of his chair. You married Mark Henderson? I did, said Evelyn quietly. But you must believe me, Sean. It was the worst mistake I've ever made in my life, she said as she stood up and reached for him. How could you marry him? Asked Sean as he stepped back from her touch and lifted his hands in shock. He was awful. You don't understand, Sean. When he and I reconnected during our senior year of college, he was a different person. He was kind and generous. Even our first year of marriage was, well, it was kind of wonderful, recalled Evelyn. But then something happened at work and it was like he slowly morphed into this horrible person, even worse than he was in high school, said Evelyn as she sat back down defeatedly. My goodness, said Miss T sympathetically as she poured tea into her own cup. Evelyn, asked Sean as he slowly sat back down and held her hand. Are you all right? Are you sure that you're free from him? Do you need any help? Evelyn looked at him with unshed tears in her eyes, placed one hand on his cheek and said, Sean, you really are as caring now as you were back when we were kids. Yeah, he's really nice. So that's quite the story, said Paulina as she broke the moment between them. Evelyn? Huh? Said Evelyn after Sean broke eye contact with her. He let go of her hand and took a sip of his tea. How are you doing? Asked Miss T softly. I'm much better now, said Evelyn as she looked at Sean. So to what do we owe the pleasure of your presence in our quaint establishment today? Asked Paulina. Not gonna let that one go, are you? Asked Miss T in a hushed volume. Nope, replied Paulina. Evelyn looked at Paulina and said, If you must know, I attended a funeral today. Oh, did you place a hit on Mark? Asked Paulina. What? I beg your pardon. No, I most certainly did not, said Evelyn, offended. Paulina, said Miss T. Paulina, said Sean. Don't mind her, Evelyn. She's just kidding, he said as he gave Paulina a look. I can't possibly be the only one thinking that, said Paulina as she looked around. Just because you're thinking it doesn't mean you should say it, said Mr. Coffee. I'll have you know that Mark is alive and well, said Evelyn. The funeral was for my Aunt May, well, his aunt really, but she and I were very close. She was my family too. I'm so sorry for your loss, said Miss T. Yes, please accept our condolences, said Sean. Thank you, Sean, said Evelyn as she turned back to face him and grabbed a hold of his hand. So did your aunt live in Wellington? Asked Mr. Coffee. Evelyn nodded. We used to talk all the time, said Evelyn, as a tear rolled down her cheek. Even during the divorce, Aunt May never cut me out of her life. Miss T went and grabbed some tissues and gave them to Evelyn. She was my favorite person in the whole wide world, as she took the tissue and gently dabbed her face. Mr. Coffee rubbed her hand in an effort to comfort her. Sean, said Evelyn, I can't help but think that maybe this is all fate, bringing you and I together after all these years. Ha! Scoffed Paulina. Everyone turned to look at her. She pretended to cough and said, Sorry, choked on my tea. Continue, she said. Evelyn continued. She even promised me her antique bracelet before she passed. Mark has been keeping it from me. Do you live in Wellington too? Asked Mr. Coffee. No, I live in Bedford, said Evelyn. But do you live here? Because I'm open to moving, she said as she looked at him innocently. Said Paulina. Everyone looked at her, and she once again pretended to cough. Sorry, the weather has been so dry lately. It's literally been raining for 3 days straight, said Mr. Coffee as he challenged her with a look. Yeah, that's outside, said Paulina. Dry as a bone in here, just dust particles and stuff. Evelyn gently turned Mr. Coffee's head to look at her. You know, Sean, perhaps we should take this opportunity to spend some time together. You know, get reacquainted. Oh gosh, said Paulina. That's gonna be pretty difficult because Sean is busy, very, very busy these days. Oh really? Asked Evelyn, irritably as she looked at Paulina. Do you control his calendar? What, pray tell, is he busy doing? I'll have you know that he and Miss T here, said Paulina as she pointed between the two, are a detective team. Together, they solve mysteries all over Wellington. You won't believe how many crimes are committed in this small town. So you solve mysteries? Asked Evelyn skeptically as she looked back at him. Well, just a little amateur sleuthing, really, replied Mr. Coffee as he sipped his tea. Please, he and Miss T are the detectives who people call whenever something is amiss, defended Paulina. Really? Is that true, Sean? Asked Evelyn. Paulina is exaggerating, but yeah, we have solved a couple of mysteries around town, I guess, said Mr. Coffee as he looked at Miss T and nodded. He is so humble, said Paulina. So you do detective work like finding missing items? Asked Evelyn. Yes, said Paulina, and like I said, that work keeps them extremely busy. Oh, this is perfect, said Evelyn as she clapped her hands. My Aunt May left me her bracelet, but Mark is withholding it from me. He claims he can't locate it, but I just know that he's lying. Will you help me find it, please? Oh, no, said Paulina to herself. You know, we're not really in the business of finding lost jewelry, said Miss T. That's right, they're not in the business of finding lost jewelry, confirmed Paulina. Did you try going to the police? Asked Mr. Coffee. Yes, the police, said Paulina as she pointed to Mr. Coffee. I did, but they said it's not a real crime, so they won't help me, said Evelyn. So I was planning to hire a private investigator, and look at that, here you are. It's fate. You've got to help me, Sean. I need you. I don't know, said Mr. Coffee. He looked at Miss T and she shrugged. Please, Sean, for old time's sake, pleaded Evelyn as she once again took hold of his hand. Yes, of course we'll help you, said Sean. Oh, you will? Wait, we? Questioned Evelyn. You must have missed the part where I said that Miss T and Mr. Coffee are a team, Paulina answered, meaning they solve cases together. Sometimes they let me tag along, but really, they are the partners. Oh, well, I guess she can tag along too, grumbled Evelyn. I just really want my bracelet. Don't you mean your aunt's bracelet? Said Paulina. Well, it's as good as mine. She promised it to me, snapped Evelyn. Hey, it's going to be okay, said Sean as he gently squeezed Evelyn's hand. Let's go over the details and see what we can do, okay? Okay, said Evelyn as she smiled at him. You're really good at this, Sean. He smiled back at her and said, Okay, what do we know about the whereabouts of this bracelet? Well, Aunt May promised it to me months ago. It's got to be inside of the jewelry box in her bedroom, said Evelyn. There's no reason for him to move it anywhere else. Sorry to say this, but is it possible that they buried her with it? Asked Paulina. Isn't that something that rich people like to do? Paulina, really? Sean rebuked. No, she actually makes a valid point. This time, said Evelyn as she glanced at Paulina. But I did see her during the viewing, and she didn't have on any jewelry. Mr. Coffee gently squeezed her hand. I'm sorry, I really wasn't trying to be crass that time, said Paulina. I was just trying to think about possible scenarios. I believe you, Paulina, said Miss T. I was actually wondering the same thing. Oh, thank you, said Paulina. So if the bracelet is in the house, said Mr. Coffee, what exactly are you proposing? We've got to get inside of that house, said Evelyn. You know, Evelyn, said Paulina, where I come from, that sounds a lot like breaking and entering, and I don't think I would do so well in prison. It's not breaking and entering when you have a key, said Evelyn. You have a key? Asked Mr. Coffee. Okay, so if you have a key, why do you need us? Asked Paulina. Well, I don't recall saying that I needed you at all, said Evelyn. I need Sean. Paulina and Miss T exchanged a look. Well, we are a team, so you can't have one of us without the others, said Mr. Coffee as he leaned back from the table. What was your plan, anyway? Paulina and Miss T smiled at each other. I thought that maybe I would go to the house when I know that Mark isn't there, said Evelyn, and search the place. Still sounds a bit sketchy to me, said Paulina. To me as well, said Sean. Listen, I have every right to be there, said Evelyn. I visited Aunt May all the time. She gave me the key to her house. The only difference is this time I'm purposely trying to not run into Mark. And grab a bracelet that you claim belongs to you, said Paulina as she sipped her tea. No, that bracelet is mine. Aunt May promised it to me, Evelyn shouted. Yeah, you said that before. Why should we believe you? Asked Paulina. Mark is only holding the bracelet to get back at me for divorcing him, said Evelyn. He doesn't care about it at all. Sean, please tell me you believe me, she pleaded and grabbed his hand. I don't know, Evelyn, said Sean. This sounds like we're about to step into the middle of a marital firestorm between you and Mark. We are divorced, said Evelyn. Trust me, there is no more fire. Funny, I can still smell the smoke from over here, said Paulina to Miss T in a hushed tone. Would you please come with me, Sean? Please, asked Evelyn. If you're there with me. Paulina cleared her throat. The three of you. We could cover more ground and locate the bracelet faster. He said hesitantly. According to Paulina, you and Miss T are good at solving mysteries, said Evelyn. This should be a quick and easy case to solve. Are you in? Mr. Coffee looked at Miss T and asked, What do you think? Miss T paused and looked at each person's face. Sean slightly smiled at her. Paulina widened her eyes and tried to subtly shake her head. Miss T finally responded, yes? Oh, good, exclaimed Evelyn as she clasped her hands together. This will be the quickest mystery that you will ever solve. All right, so what's the plan? Asked Mr. Coffee. Tomorrow morning, said Evelyn, Mark has an appointment with a real estate agent at Aunt May's house. Can you believe he's already trying to sell her home? That scoundrel. How do you know that he has an appointment? Asked Miss T. Because I still have access to his shared calendar, said Evelyn innocently. It's been a month and you didn't think to erase that calendar from your phone? Asked Paulina. You must always be one step ahead of your enemies, said Evelyn. Paulina watched her suspiciously. Let's get back on track, said Mr. Coffee. Right, said Evelyn. So, we wait until they leave, and then we will have the house all to ourselves and can look for the bracelet. He won't even know it's gone. Sound good? Yeah, I guess, said Miss T. Okay, what time are we meeting in the morning? Because I was planning to sleep in a little later tomorrow, said Paulina. It is my day off after all. Evelyn exhaled loudly and said, How's 11 a.m.? That works, said Mr. Coffee. How about you? He asked Miss T. Yes, that's fine, said Miss T. You sure? Asked Mr. Coffee as he smiled at her. Yes, said Miss T, and she smiled back. Evelyn looked between the two of them suspiciously and said, Here, Sean, let me give you my phone number so that I can text you the address. Sean gave her his cell phone, and she typed in her number and also sent a text to her phone. There, now I have your number too, and we can communicate. Yippee, said Paulina under her breath. 11 a.m. works for me too, in case anyone was wondering, said Paulina out loud. All right, so I will pick you two up in the morning, said Mr. Coffee as he pointed at Miss T and Paulina. And we will meet you at the house, he said as he faced Evelyn. Okay, they all agreed. I really enjoyed the tea that we drank this evening, by the way, he said as he looked at Miss T. It's a turmeric, ginger, and cinnamon blend, replied Miss T, very pleased. It's absolutely delightful, said Mr. Coffee as he smiled at her. Thanks, said Miss T shyly. Great, said Evelyn as she stood up and looked at her phone. I must be going now. My driver is out front. Sean, would you please help me with my coat? Sure thing, said Mr. Coffee. He stood, went to the rack, and then helped her to put on the coat. Thank you, said Evelyn. She reached up, kissed his cheek, and allowed her hand to linger on his chest. I'll see you in the morning. Yup, we'll all see you there, said Paulina. Evelyn gave her a look, then turned and left the cafe. The three friends stared out the door for a moment. That's quite a friend you have there, said Paulina as she turned to clean the table. It must be nice to reconnect after all these years, said Miss T as she helped Paulina. Yeah, it is, said Mr. Coffee, still staring at the door, deep in thought. Chapter 2. It's kinda cute, I guess, said Miss T. I beg to differ, said Paulina. I wouldn't get too close, said Mr. Coffee. You guys, that's just Aunt May's cat, said Evelyn. You can say that it's a cat, but it looks like pure evil to me, said Paulina with a shiver. So dramatic, said Evelyn. Are you a cat hater too, Sean? I wouldn't say hate, said Mr. Coffee with a shrug. More like strongly dislike. They watched as the cat entered the house through the pet door. No evil cats in our homes, am I right? Said Paulina as she high-fived Miss T. When Paulina turned to high-five Mr. Coffee, he shook his head at her with a chuckle. Ha, ha, remarked Evelyn. I still don't know why you're dressed in all black. I told you before, this isn't breaking and entering. I have the key right here. I was trying to be inconspicuous, said Paulina as she looked down at her clothes. Well, that's kind of difficult to do with all of us standing here in front of the house with this big umbrella, joked Miss T. It was the next morning and the rain was still falling in Wellington. Mr. Coffee was holding a very large umbrella that covered the four of them. "You're right," said Mr. Coffee. "We should get inside so that we don't draw any more attention to ourselves, and so that we can get out of this rain." "Evelyn, are you all right?" asked Miss T. Evelyn wiped a tear from her eye, but didn't answer. "Evelyn, are you okay?" asked Sean, as he rubbed her arm. He handed the umbrella to Paulina and then hugged Evelyn. After a moment, Evelyn said, "Yes, let's go inside." She kept a tight hold on Mr. Coffee as they walked slightly ahead of Miss T and Paulina. "Clingy much?" whispered Paulina to Miss T. "Let's try to cut her some slack," whispered Miss T. "She did just lose her aunt." "Her husband's aunt," whispered Paulina. "Come on. We know that there are people who come into our lives who become like family," whispered Miss T as she playfully nudged Paulina with her shoulder. "Okay, don't you make me start crying now," responded Paulina with a smile. "It's hard enough trying to hold this ridiculously big umbrella." They stepped up to the entrance. Evelyn opened the door and they entered the house, where they encountered dozens of brown moving boxes stacked up around the room. Evelyn gasped when she saw all of the boxes. "I can't believe he's already packed up the house," said Evelyn as she walked around. "You can't be too surprised," said Paulina as she deposited the wet umbrella by the door. "You said that he had a meeting with a real estate agent this morning." "But it's so soon," said Evelyn as she threw herself back into Mr. Coffee's arms. "It's like he's trying to erase her memory." "I'm sorry," said Sean soothingly. "Know this, he may be able to make her things go away, but he can never erase the memories that you have right in here," he said as he gently touched her head. Evelyn slightly smiled. "Let's go find that bracelet, shall we?" Evelyn nodded. Paulina cleared her throat and said, "So where do we start?" she asked as she looked around. Evelyn stood up straight and said, "Well, I was thinking that we split up. Sean and I will go check out the bedroom while you two can look around down here." "Veto," said Paulina. "We just played that game a couple of weeks ago and it was terrible. And I still don't know what happened in that closet. Not doing that again. Nope. Plus, it makes no sense. You're the only one who knows this house. Why in the world would we separate from you?" "She does make a good point," said Mr. Coffee. "It makes more sense for us to stay together. Perhaps we should all check the bedroom first, before we look down here in these boxes." "You're right, Sean," said Evelyn as she looked down at her hands. "I should have thought of that." "It's okay," said Sean as he gently lifted her chin to look up at him. "You've been under a lot of stress. So, come on, let me take you to the bedroom, to look for the bracelet." Evelyn smiled, took his hand, and led him up the stairs. Miss T withheld a chuckle. Paulina crossed her arms and gave Mr. Coffee a look. He looked slightly embarrassed and said, "Come on, guys." They all made their way upstairs. Evelyn led them into a large bedroom filled with more boxes. "Look at this," said Evelyn, clearly upset as she hit one of the boxes. "He's already packed up her bedroom, too." "He is not playing around," said Paulina as she walked around the bedroom. "Okay, everyone, start looking through these items. You're looking for a jewelry box," said Evelyn. "The bracelet must be in here somewhere." They all started looking through the boxes. At some point, the cat wandered into the room and roamed around while they worked. Miss T opened a box and whispered, "Hey, Paulina, look at this," she said, holding up a fancy hat. "Oh, that's nothing," whispered Paulina. "Check this out." She held up some fancy high heels. "Aren't these amazing? Aunt May had style." "She certainly did," said Evelyn as she smiled proudly. "I can't even begin to tell you how often I raided her closet over the years." "You two are horrible whisperers, by the way," she said as she picked up the cat and cuddled with it. Paulina and Miss T looked at each other, chuckled, and continued looking through the boxes. "Looks like I found a jewelry box," said Mr. Coffee proudly. The ladies stopped what they were doing and quickly walked over to where he stood. "What's inside?" asked Miss T. "Don't know," said Mr. Coffee. "I haven't opened it yet. Figured I'd give the honor to you," he said as he gave the jewelry box to Evelyn with a smile. "Thank you, Sean," Evelyn said as she smiled back at him and gently placed the cat on the ground. She then carefully opened the jewelry box and looked through the contents inside. "No," said Evelyn as she continued to search through the box. "What's wrong?" asked Mr. Coffee. "It's not in here," said Evelyn frantically. "Oh no, are you sure?" asked Miss T. "Yes, of course I'm sure. What an idiotic question," snapped Evelyn. "I know what the bracelet looks like, and it's not in here." "Hey, you don't need to speak to her like that," said Sean. "Yeah," said Paulina. "She was only trying to show you some sympathy." "Well, I don't need her sympathy. I need my bracelet," said Evelyn, almost hysterical. Whoa, 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 whoa. Let's take a breath," said Sean. "Yes, I'm going to need you to take your intensity level down about 100 notches," said Paulina. "These 2 days, you've been nicer to that disgusting cat than you've been to either one of us," said Paulina as she motioned between her and Miss T. "I will use whatever volume I want," said Evelyn in a snarky manner. "In this house, I'm basically the queen. I hired you. Sean, perhaps you should remind your friend about who's in charge here." "Mr. Coffee, perhaps you need to talk to your friend because she's being very rude," said Paulina, "and I don't recall getting paid for this case." Ladies, said Sean as he raised his voice. "Please, let's just take a breath and calm down. Evelyn, I'm going to need you to respect my friends, or else this whole search and rescue mission is over. Paulina, today we are a team. Let's get along, shall we?" "Yes," agreed Miss T. "How about we all go to the kitchen and take a 10-minute calming tea break?" "I think that sounds like an excellent idea," said Mr. Coffee as he nodded at Miss T and smiled. "We can take a few minutes to regroup and then start again." "Fine," said Evelyn. "Fine," said Paulina. "Lead the way, Your Highness." Evelyn rolled her eyes and said, "Come on, Sean, let's go to the kitchen." She grabbed Mr. Coffee's arm and marched out of the room. "Can you believe her?" said Paulina with a lowered voice. "As far as I'm concerned, we are only here as a favor to Sean," responded Miss T. "Agreed," said Paulina. "So let's find this bracelet as quickly as possible and get out of here." "I'm still going to make some tea, though," said Alina. "I'm kind of excited to see what the kitchen is like in this place." "Me too, actually," chuckled Paulina, and they left the room together. Chapter 3. They all entered the kitchen and looked around. "What in the world?" asked Evelyn as she looked around the spotless kitchen. "What's wrong?" asked Mr. Coffee. "There's not a single moving box in here," said Evelyn. "That idiot packed up the entire house and forgot to pack the kitchen." "Oh, wow," chuckled Paulina as she looked at Miss T, who was walking around and peeking through the cupboards. "Find anything good over there, tea lady?" "I counted 3 different teas, and I saw enough ingredients to whip up some quick scones," said Miss T with great delight. "Well, whip it up, woman. I'm hungry," joked Paulina as she sat down on a stool by the counter. "You know, I too would appreciate a little bite," said Mr. Coffee innocently as he sat down next to Paulina. Miss T smiled at him. "Well, there's only one question left," she said. "Only one?" joked Paulina. Miss T leaned down on the counter, looked at Mr. Coffee and Paulina, cleared her throat, and said loudly, "Permission to use the kitchen, Your Highness?" she said as she squeezed her eyes shut and laughed with Paulina and Mr. Coffee. You too, Sean? Asked Evelyn. Hey, chuckled Mr. Coffee. I'm just a simple man looking for a good cup of tea and a scone. Paulina and Miss T laughed. I really don't appreciate you all laughing at me, said Evelyn as she crossed her arms. Hey, isn't the kitchen technically considered the servants' quarters? Asked Paulina. So I'd say we are well within our rights to laugh in here. They continued to laugh while Miss T retrieved a bag of flour. But we really don't have time for this, said Evelyn. I have a feeling that if I don't find that bracelet today, I'll never see it again, she cried. Always so dramatic, whispered Paulina to Miss T. Evelyn, said Mr. Coffee, who stood up, walked over to her and gave her a hug. We are going to do our very best to locate that bracelet. Thank you, Sean, said Evelyn. It's like you're the only one who really cares. Miss T and Paulina exchanged a look and rolled their eyes. Suddenly, a new voice boomed into the room. I've already typed 911 on my phone. Give me one good reason why I shouldn't hit send. Everyone's head swiftly turned to see a man standing in the kitchen behind them, holding up a phone in his hand. Who in the world is that? Whispered Paulina to Miss T, who shrugged her shoulders. You have one chance to answer this question. Who are you and what are you doing inside of my home? Mark, you louse, yelled Evelyn. This isn't your home. You're a cheat and you're a liar. And that was 2 questions. You can't even count. Evelyn? He asked in confusion, just seeing her for the first time in the kitchen. I didn't see you. That man was blocking you from my view. Is this your new patsy? He scoffed. I can see you set your standards pretty low after I left you. Remember when you asked whatever happened to him? Said Evelyn to Mr. Coffee, as she motioned to Mark with her hand. Well, here he is in all of his mean-spirited glory. She then turned to him and said, Mark, you remember him, don't you? She asked as she pointed to Sean. The man you almost sent to prison, whose life you almost ruined? What on earth are you talking about? Replied Mark curtly. Evelyn, perhaps you need to be more specific, said Sean as he slowly stalked towards Mark. Perhaps he set up multiple innocent men over the years to take the fall for fake crimes, he said as he took a few large steps forward and hovered over Mark. Funny, said Sean. You look much smaller than I remember, he said as he looked him up and down. I don't know who you are, buddy, said Mark as he backed up. But you need to leave my property now before I have the police come and throw you out. Oh, Mark, would you stop with the threats? Said Evelyn as she marched right up to him. They're with me. I don't know why you think that little tidbit would matter, said Mark as he pointed in her face. You're not welcome here either. Give me that, he said to Miss T as he walked over and snatched the bag of flour out of her hands. Hey, said Sean, watch it. If you all don't get off my property right now, yelled Mark, I'll have you thrown in jail so fast your head will spin. Miss T wiped her hands on her pants and said, I'm just gonna go over there somewhere. She quickly moved to where Paulina was now standing. You have no grounds to throw us out, yelled Evelyn. Aunt May gave me a key. Yeah, and you know what, said Mark. Now that she's gone, I want that key back. Well, let's do a swap then, said Evelyn, thinking quickly. Give me my bracelet and I'll give you the key. Mark stepped into Evelyn's space and yelled, Oh, give it up, Queen Evelyn. Now that Aunt May is gone, you have no more power here, so get out. Now wait a minute, said Sean as he stepped between Mark and Evelyn. Ooh, he woke Batman, whispered Paulina to Miss T as she clutched her arm. You will never speak to any of these ladies like that ever again. Do you hear me? Said Sean with an eerily calm and serious tone. Who are you? Asked Mark. What, you don't recognize me, Mark? Asked Sean as he towered over Mark, imposing his quiet, brute strength over him. The man you almost sent to prison for a crime that you fabricated? Well, allow me to reintroduce myself. The name is Hanson. Sean Hanson. I don't know what you're talking about, said Mark as he walked away, the bag of flour still in his hands. Oh, Mark, quit lying, yelled Evelyn. You know you remember, Sean. We just talked about this 3 months ago. Oh, said Sean, so you do remember. I don't care what you want, Mark said to Evelyn. You all need to leave now, or I'm calling the police. What's wrong with you? Have you always been this detestable? Said Evelyn. Aunt May would be so disappointed in you. Then she turned and left the kitchen. We're not supposed to, go after her or anything, right? Whispered Paulina to Miss T. I have no idea, whispered Miss T. What's the protocol for comforting someone who treats you like dirt under her shoe? Good question, whispered Paulina. Maybe some kind words with no physical contact? I don't know, whispered Miss T. It still sounds a bit unnecessary. Maybe we don't actually have to go out there, whispered Paulina. Maybe she's fine and there's no need for us to follow her. Ladies, would you please follow Evelyn outside? Asked Sean as he kept his eyes on Mark and rubbed his hands together. Dag nabbit, said Paulina. Guess that answers that question, said Miss T with a chuckle, as the ladies walked out of the room, leaving Sean and Mark alone in the kitchen. Well, what do you want? Asked Mark as he backed up and clutched the bag of flour in front of him. I can still call the police, you know, he said as he held up his phone with a shaky hand. Sean smiled like a hunter who just trapped his prey. Here's what's going to happen. Chapter 4. The ladies stood just outside of the house under the awning. They were trying to stay covered from the rain because Evelyn had taken the umbrella. Miss T and Paulina watched Evelyn, who looked very upset, as she paced back and forth much further down the walkway. Do we really need to console her? Said Paulina. Because I just don't want to. I don't even think we could. I mean, she basically hates us, said Miss T. I mean, she's not even our friend, said Paulina. She's Mr. Coffee's friend, right? I guess, said Miss T. But I still feel bad. Know what I just thought of? Asked Paulina. What's that phrase? The friend of my friend is my friend? That sounds off, said Miss T. I think you may have that wrong. Oh, said Paulina. Okay, let me think. The friend of my friend is... No, I think something about enemies is in there, said Miss T as she tried to remember. Like, my enemy's friend or something. Said Paulina. But why would it be my enemy's friend? You could be right, said Miss T. Maybe it's just all friends and that's it? We should Google it, said Paulina. Ladies, said Mr. Coffee as he joined them. Oh, hey, what happened in the kitchen after we left? Asked Paulina as she looked around. Where's Mark? What are you two doing over here? Asked Mr. Coffee. I thought you would try to help Evelyn calm down. No, said Paulina. We only left the kitchen because you asked us to leave. We had no intention of consoling that horrible woman. Well, we thought about it for a moment, said Miss T. Yeah, we did, said Paulina. We did think about it. Then we dropped that insane thought and realized that it was probably better to stay over here, what with the rain and all. Yup, said Miss T. Ladies, I'm disappointed, said Mr. Coffee. What? Why? asked Paulina. Evelyn has been so mean to us since the moment she met us. Why should we be nice to her now? Sean, I know that she's your friend, said Miss T, but I think the nostalgia is clouding your senses. Evelyn has done nothing but belittle us. She's only nice to you. Yeah, said Paulina. Personally, I think she's looking to replace the old ring on her finger with a shiny new model, she said as she wiggled her fingers at him. What on earth are you talking about? Asked Mr. Coffee. Paulina patted him on the arm and said, Oh, Sean, sometimes I can't tell whether you're naive or just really humble. And I know that you're much too smart to truly let us know what's going on inside of that brilliant mind of yours. Huh? Asked Mr. Coffee. Okay, we'll go with naive for now, said Paulina as she patted his cheek. So, are you trying to compliment me or insult me? I'm confused, said Mr. Coffee. I think maybe Paulina was just trying to say, added Miss T, that we think you just don't know how great you truly are, and sometimes people try to take advantage. Mr. Coffee replied, Well, Paulina sometimes likes to give me a hard time, so I thought, wait, you think I'm great? Oh, no, don't you get distracted, said Paulina as she clapped her hands. We can revisit what she said after you tell us what happened in that kitchen. What happened? Let me ask you a question first, said Sean. If you were having a bad day today, you have each other to turn to. But who does Evelyn have? I'm sorry, Sean. It's just hard to keep being nice to someone who's so mean, said Miss T. And you know that Miss T is really good at being nice, said Paulina. We all have the potential to be mean, given the right circumstances, said Sean. Good friends can help us stay more balanced. I don't know what it's like for her any other day, but today Evelyn has us, said Mr. Coffee. Then he quickly jogged over to join Evelyn under the umbrella. Ugh, I hate it when he's right and he's all deep about it, said Paulina. And did you see how he still didn't tell us what happened in that kitchen? It's the closet story all over again. I know, Miss T chuckled. Mr. Coffee jogged up to Evelyn, stood under the umbrella, and held out his hand, which contained the missing bracelet. Evelyn looked at his hand, squealed, and jumped into his arms. She nearly dropped the umbrella, but Mr. Coffee easily grabbed a hold of it. Thank you, thank you, thank you, she exclaimed. Glad we were able to help you locate it, said Sean. How did you get it? Asked Evelyn as she looked at the bracelet in awe. No need to get into the nitty-gritty, said Mr. Coffee. The important thing is that you have your bracelet and Mark will never bother you again. That sounds ominous, but I don't care. Sean, you are a godsend, she smiled as she hugged the bracelet to her chest. I don't know how I could ever repay you. Your joy is thanks enough, said Sean. And I didn't realize how cheesy that would sound until I just said it. They chuckled. Well, let me at least take you out to dinner? Asked Evelyn. Mr. Coffee looked over at Miss T and Paulina, who were watching the exchange, but were too far away to hear any of it. Sorry, but I already have plans. Evelyn looked over at the ladies, then down at the bracelet in her hands. You know, Sean, I was hoping that perhaps we could, maybe this is fate's way of bringing us back together. Sean pulled Evelyn in for a long hug, and when he pulled back, he said, Evelyn, it was so good to see you after all these years, and I'm glad that we were able to help you find your bracelet. Oh, I feel a but coming, said Evelyn. However, said Sean. He smiled and walked her to the car that was waiting for her. No fair, said Evelyn. Now you're just using synonyms. She smiled playfully at him. Sorry, Evelyn, said Sean. But, aha, said Evelyn as she poked his chest playfully. They laughed. Oh, you see how much fun we have together? Just like we did in high school. Think of how much fun we could have now. It's fate. The thing is, Evelyn, I don't believe in fate, said Sean. Plus, I do have a number of important investments that are occupying a lot of my time and attention at the moment, and I don't think that would be very fair to you. Evelyn chuckled. I should have known. What? Asked Sean. I couldn't help but notice the way that you keep looking at the tea lady over there whenever you think that no one is paying attention, said Evelyn. Pretty sure I never stood a chance, did I? Miss Tea? Asked Mr. Coffee as he rubbed the back of his neck. Oh, we're just friends. Evelyn chuckled. Now who's the liar? She placed a hand on his chest and said, Sean, you're a good man and you have such a good heart. Tell her how you feel. She gave him another hug and then entered the car. Sean closed the door. Evelyn rolled down the window and said, Sean, if things don't work out, remember, you still have my number. She then smiled, rolled up the window, and the car drove away. As the rain continued to pour down on his umbrella, Mr. Coffee turned to look at Miss Tea. He smiled at her and said to himself, Tell her how I feel? And thus ends the case of the Rainy High School reunion. The end. I do hope that you enjoyed this story. Join us again next time for another tale from our Bedtime Tea collection. And for more Mr. Coffee and Miss Tea stories, be sure to listen to our One More Steep Before Sleep podcast. Sleep well, jolly tea drinkers, and may your cups overflow with joy and peace.